Dear colleagues, on behalf of our committees on budgets and on budgetary control, I'm very welcome here today Commissioner Designate for Budget and Administration, Johannes Hahn, to this hearing. I would like to welcome also the members of the Juri Committee, invited as Associated Committee, and the Juri Chair, Mrs. Netzinga. I would like to recall also that in line with the guidelines for the approval of the Commission, Parliament evaluates commissioners designate on the basis of their general competence, European commitment, and personal independence. It also assesses the knowledge of their prospective portfolio and, of course, their communication skills. Let me also recall that before the hearing, the Commissioner designate has replied in written to a preparatory questionnaire, and the written answers have been distributed to members in all languages. Finally, be informed that the Committee on Legal Affairs has raised no objection to the holding of the hearing of the Commissioner designate. Commissioner designate, the next 5 years are obviously crucial for Europe. A new multi-annual financial framework has to enter into force by the end of 2020, as well as the sectoral programs. We need a speedy agreement. We owe it to the financial beneficiaries and the citizens in general, but we cannot overlook the quality of such an agreement. The EU budget is under pressure from several sides, with requests to reduce it due to the Brexit, due to the economic situations at national levels, due to the somewhat artificial and outdated visions on the net balances of the member states, which all take the attention away from the debate on how to invest into policies with what I would call EU added value. We expect a strong and ambitious Commission and a strong Commissioner on budget, striving not to defend the least possible compromise in the Council, but to work for an ambitious multi-annual budget which takes the principal positions of this House duly into account. We expect a Commissioner who acts as a genuine, honest broker between Parliament and Council, acting neutrally, transparently, and respecting the roles and prerogatives of every institution to ensure that work can be conducted in a climate of full trust. I'm sure we will have the chance to dig more into these topics with you during the debate, and I now pass the floor to Madame Hohlmeier to explain how we will structure today the debate.
Dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, dear Commissioner Designate, I have the nice role now to explain the structure of the debate after having heard what we all expect from the Commissioner Designate in future. So now I explain what will take place now. The Commissioner Designate is invited to make an opening oral statement of no longer than 15 minutes. He will then also have 5 minutes at the end of the meeting for a closing statement. After the introduction, there will be time for 25 questions from MEPs. The debate will be held in accordance with slots of 5 minutes each, with 1 minute for the question and 2 minutes for the answer from the candidate commissioner. In case of follow-up questions, the question should not be longer than 1 minute, with 1 minute also for the reply. The first round of 7 questions will be asked by representatives of political groups. The second round of 18 questions is based on the overall distribution of questions among the political groups, including also a representative from the non-attached members, while also respecting the dehault order of each committee. I would like to draw the attention to the fact that interpretation will be provided in 23 languages. All speakers can therefore use their own language. Speakers are now to be reminded that what they say will need to be interpreted, and that they should therefore not speak too quickly. This always happens when you try to have in 1 minute every question that is in your mind. So sometimes the speeches are a little bit too quick for our interpreters. So may I ask you, or may I require that you're trying to speak so that our interpreters have a chance to translate. And if you're speaking very, very quickly, then you have to be aware you are all web streamed. So everybody can listen to what you are saying and has to try to understand it. So I'm very pleased now that we have this hearing, and having explained all the technicalities, I would like to cordially invite Mr. Hahn to take now the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Chair, honorable members, ladies and gentlemen, I wouldn't say it's a kind of coming home, but it's a privilege to return to this chamber for a third time as a commissioner designate. And I remember my first hearing as if it would be like yesterday. It gave a start to a very fruitful cooperation with the European Parliament based on trust and mutual respect. And if I'm confirmed, I would be very much looking forward to continuing in the same spirit of cooperation with the Parliament, but especially with the three committees present here. This time, I'm standing for the position of Commissioner for Budget and Administration. I do so fully aware of how vital it is to deploy our financial resources and the talent of our people to the fullest to deliver on the promises we make to our citizens. In this regard, I am committed to help deliver the vision set out by our President-elect in her political guidelines and to turn our political priorities into results that make a real difference. The challenges we face today are manifold. Current developments on the global stage require that the European Union does not only act more self-assertively, it demands that Europe takes its destiny into its own hands. That's why we need a geopolitical commission that takes the lead not only to close the social and economic gaps within Europe, but also to turn towards challenges into tomorrow's opportunities. For me, the budget is the policy cast in numbers. It's a key enabler of the political priorities, and as such, it is one of the most visible tools to demonstrate the principles of the European Union to its citizens and the European added value. The budget is a tool to ensure Europe remains a democratic, peaceful, prosperous and competitive force. It's an expression of European solidarity. It intervenes only when it is more effective to spend money at the EU level rather than within member states. As such, it's anchored in the subsidiarity principle, and it is aiming at delivering European value added. I am well aware that delivering on ambitious political guidelines, as outlined by the President-elect against the backdrop of a possible Brexit and difficult negotiations on the multi-annual financial framework, as it was already sketched out by the Chair, this will be a challenge of my mission right from the outset. However, I can promise that I will spare no efforts to facilitate a timely agreement on a financial framework that is fit for purpose. It's vital to continue negotiations with speed and determination to avoid damaging delays in the launch of new programs. So you can rely on me to make a strong case that the impact of a budget smaller than proposed by the Commission would be damaging for our policy ambitions and would compromise the Union's capacity to deliver efficiently. In this regard, the Commission's MFF proposals remain a very solid basis for an agreement. The new initiative announced by the President-elect need to be taken forward within the framework of this agreement. This means giving a more specific emphasis in the MFF negotiations to certain elements and identifying targeted adjustments where needed. Here, I would also like to thank the European Parliament for its very clear position. which clearly illustrates your expectations for an ambitious European Union budget. As a concrete example, a priority for me in the MFF negotiations will be to include the new Just Transition Fund. Policies to address climate change require unprecedented transformation of the way we live. That's why we have to integrate social and economic aspects of the green change from the start to make sure nobody is left behind. The EU budget will show the way and channel funds to regions and communities most in need. The EU budget already is an instrument of green transition, with 25% of its expenditure for the next MFF earmarked for climate-related activities, which is an increase by 25%. The EU budget also ensures solidarity towards our neighbours and external partners via humanitarian aid, migration management, tackling trafficking networks, and many other initiatives in partnership with third countries. But the EU budget has also long been a vital source of growth-enhancing, future-oriented investment for the whole of Europe. I think in particular of digitalisation, innovation, research and education. Having said this, I would like to recall that the EU budget should not be seen in isolation. Whatever the size of the budget is, 1.1 or 1.3% of gross national income, it would not be sufficient to finance all the needs and projects with European value added. The Union budget should be seen as a crucial catalyst of public and private investments, channeling them towards EU political priorities. Only by mobilising all sources of funding, we will be able to address the challenges facing Europe, to address climate change, to foster innovation, to generate investments, to provide social cushion. I will therefore explore how to better link EU programmes and national financing to deliver on our common priorities and obtain the best value for money, and how to channel private funds towards projects serving our common European objectives and the interests of European citizens. The same holds true for the revenue side of the EU budget, which should be in full support of EU policy priorities. In agreement with the European Parliament, I am convinced that reaching an agreement on the revenue side is crucial for concluding the negotiations on the MFF. The European Parliament has made clear that own resources reform and the diversification of revenue sources is a condition for granting its consent on the future framework. I will remind the Council of that position and hope that we can achieve a closer link between EU policy priorities and the budget by introducing new own resources. Sound financial management and the fight against misuse of funds need to be ensured up to the highest standards, while at the same time trying to maintain proportionality and cost-effectiveness of controls. With Olaf, we have at union level a strong, independent and well-respected guardian, tasked to protect the financial interests of the Union. But preventive action and strong enforcement are necessary to gain trust from European taxpayers. However, for me it's imperative to put into place the rule of law mechanism ensuring the protection of the Union's budget in case of generalised deficiencies in Member States. Strengthening the link between EU funding and the respect for the rule of law should not be considered as a sanction mechanism. It's foremost a tool to protect the Union budget and ensure sound financial management. I welcome the support given by the European Parliament to this proposal. Regarding conflicts of interest, I will make it my priority to oversee the broad and coordinated action the Commission is taking and take it forward. In 2018, the financial regulation has introduced reinforced rules. I will dedicate necessary resources to the coordination of the Commission services' actions as regards conflict of interest issues and cases, as well as to the setting up of a closer relationship with Member States to tackle potential issues at an early stage. As Commissioner, I would be responsible for the management of the revenue side of the budget, including Member States' own resources contribution. The Commission has zero tolerance for infringement in this field. namely for what concerns own resources, and strictly pursues any irregularities. I am committed to continue this policy and to keep the Commission's impeccable track record. To be successful in my mission, mutual trust and constructive dialogue with you is key. I am committed to having this dialogue with the committees, the groups and individual members in a spirit of openness and trust. I will do my utmost to provide open, honest and impartial facilitation between the two arms of the budgetary authority. Therefore, interaction and exchanges are important, and you can count on me to honour my obligations, and I think I have proven in the past 10 years to do this in practice. I am committed to improve the link between spending programme performance and budgetary planning implementation and reporting. I also agree that any such budgetary framework should be clearly policy-driven and allow a true readjustment of programmes in line with political priorities on the basis of performance, information and its assessment. And while Member States continue to be responsible for shared management, I will also work towards ensuring a more comprehensive overview of expenditure and key data. The Commission proposal for a common provisional regulation for post-2020 also reinforces the requirements for transparency and communication. We have taken note of your recommendations to improve and streamline the Commission's reporting. I will make specific efforts to address this with regard to the annual activity reports of each Director General, the programme statements accompanying the draft budget and the annual management and performance report. The Commission staff will be at the forefront of the delivery of the President-elect's priorities for the next 5 years if the Union is to lead the transition to a healthy planet and a new digital world while upgrading our social market economy and asserting its global leadership. It needs highly skilled and dedicated civil servants. In this context, I would like to lay out key elements of my vision for a diverse, value-driven and future-proof European public administration. I will make sure this vision is translated into a human resource strategy for the Commission. I intend in particular to act on several aspects. First, the EU institutions are required to recruit staff from the broadest possible geographical basis. Currently, 10 nationalities from the pre-2004 Member States are significantly underrepresented among the junior grade administrators in the Commission. I will do my utmost to reverse this trend within this term. This is not only a matter of credibility for the administration, but also a matter of trust in the institution. Second, a point that has probably not come out strong enough in my written reply, and I regret this, I am committed to deliver on gender equality as set out by the President-elect's commitment. Gender equality has always been important for me. When serving my country as a Minister for Science and Research, I introduced, I think it was already 12 years ago, a legally binding quota in committees at universities. As Commissioner in charge of European neighbourhood policy and enlargement negotiations, I wanted my department to lead by example by going beyond the target assigned to it. Third, I believe that transparency, integrity, accountability, professionalism and commitment to public interests should remain tenets of our administration if Europeans are to have faith in our Union. If confirmed, I will make sure that the Commission leads the way in setting high standards for its members and staff. Fourth, I am committed to deliver on a digitally transformed Commission and user-focused and data-driven public administration. This means building and operating digital government solutions in support of policy and administrative processes. The challenge is to modernise the infrastructure and tools in a secure way. I want the Commission to lead by example, working alongside with Member States in transforming the public sector for a Europe fit for the digital age. Finally, I will therefore ensure that the European Commission has the right tools and capabilities to achieve its digital transformation without exposing itself to new risks. In conclusion, I look forward to working closely with you as a Commissioner for Budget and Administration to deliver together with the European Parliament our ambitious political agenda, and therefore I am looking forward to your questions and a hopeful, interesting and fruitful discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hahn, and also for respecting the time slot as we had foreseen. I would really request all the other speakers to do that too. So in the first round, I give now the word to Mr. José Manuel Fernandes, EPP.
Obrigado, Sr.
Yes, thank you very much, Chairman. I'll be speaking Portuguese. I wanted to thank you for these words of introduction, Commissioner Designate. I'd like to congratulate you because I think that just confirms your vast experience and the competence that you've already shown. It's brought out your ambitious vision, and I would say that it is close, if not identical, to the vision of the Parliament. Commissioner Designate, back in November 2018, the Parliament adopted a mandate with a huge majority for negotiating the MFF and the own resources system. So we have been ready since that point in time to negotiate with the Council, but we are waiting for the Council. So 1.3% of GNI of 27 member states. That is not just a random number. This 1.3% are the result of a logical methodology. We added together the amount required for each policy. So you've got existing policies, the CAP, fisheries, all of this has to be maintained. But then you also have reinforcements for policies about Erasmus, the environment, research, small and medium-sized companies. We added all of these together, and it all added up to 1.3% of the GNI of the 27 member states. So my first question is, do you agree with our proposal? Do you agree with our methodology here in the Parliament? It's a bottom-up methodology. And do you agree with the following statement? New priorities have to be followed up with new financial envelopes. Thank you.
First, I would like to thank the previous government, and there's some personal continuity on its very ambitious, realistic, and forthcoming, future-oriented proposal. I agree. First, one should have a bottom-up approach to identify what is needed, but also, if you like, based on a top-down political guideline or guidelines, what are, so to say, the directions. And in an ideal world, they both should come together like constructing a tunnel. You should start from the two ends, and you should ideally meet in the middle. I did something similar 6-7 years ago when I reformed the European cohesion policy by, so to say, bottom-up, following the Europe 2020 agenda at that time, but based on this, starting bottom-up to program, to fix the individual programs, to identify areas of intervention, to, by the way, at that time, introduce for the first time an obligatory minimum share of money which should be spent for energy efficiency and renewable energy production. And I think this is the right way forward, to have a bottom-up approach, then identify where you land, and then try to negotiate. I hope this is a convincing model also for our member states, in particular those who are more reluctant, and I think together with my colleagues we will try to convince in particular those who are very much focused on this 1% issue to see that new challenges, new tasks need more flexibility on their side.
Follow up?
Microphone, please, for the speaker.
Nós só daremos o acordo ao quadro financeiro plurianual.
Well, we want an agreement with the Parliament's view for the MFF with new own resources in it. We rely upon the Commission to convince the Member States. What are the new own resources that the European Commission, in the form of yourself, the Commissioner designate, what do you support?
Ja, wie Sie wissen, gibt es hier
Well, as you'll be aware, there's some very specific ideas as to how the plastic bag fee should work, the expansion of the ETS allowances.
How it is in my mind, the extension of the ETS auctioning revenues. These are two areas where I believe a very concrete and very quick result is feasible. There are some other own resources which are for the moment not realistic in terms of having an agreement, but I'm very much committed, and maybe we will have other opportunities during this hearing, to own resources and to the extension of own resources on the overall budget of the European Union. So we should try together to identify potential own resources, in particular those who are dedicated to address climate action-related initiatives.
Thank you. Second question, Madam Eider Gardiazabal Rubial, SND.
Muchas gracias, presidente.
Thank you, Chairman. Commissioner designate, you were saying that you already have extensive experience at the European Commission, but probably they have now entrusted to you the most complex portfolio and the one that's hardest to take up, because everyone makes promises, but no one stumps up the funding to deliver on those promises. You mentioned many of the commitments, the fair transition, tripling of Erasmus, but none of these were in the original proposal from the Commission. This wasn't just something from the President-elect. Many of the individual commissioners designate have agreed to press ahead with these promises, but it seems to me there is a contradiction between those promises and the commitments when we look at the forthcoming budget. Don't you believe that the Commission should table a new adjusted budget proposal to show that, as well as fine words, there will be some palpable commitments with the money attached to them? I'm rather concerned that in your initial statement you talked about targeted adjustments. We all know that when we talk about adjustments, we're basically talking about cuts. And as José Manuel Fernandes quite rightly said, the leitmotif in this committee is if you have a new objective, then you need new funding for it. So I'd like to know how you would address that if you do indeed become Commissioner.
Yeah, nochmals.
Well, once again, I would say that the proposal from the Commission, from the outgoing Commission, is a solid basis to work on. It does use a bottom-up approach, and I'm very grateful to see that the Parliament has made a very ambitious proposal. In an ideal world, we should end up somewhere in between the two so that we can actually implement the ideas that the incoming Commission has defined as priorities. I'm convinced that with an adaptation of the existing MFF, we'll be able to get most of it in. It is doable, it is possible. But of course, we should under no circumstances end up lower than the Commission's proposal. I don't think that that is imaginable at all. So we will be standing by your side in the debate with the Council. I'll remind you that many member states are actually on our side. They've understood that appropriate resources are really required, and the just transition that you addressed, that can be financed from the budget with the necessary adaptations. The Sustainable Europe Investment Plan, that is also implementable. There are quite a number of different areas that we can implement if they are made a priority. We need to prioritize. We need to be very precise and strict. Then things are feasible. And when it comes to the indicators and the reporting, we have to be absolutely precise as well. And we might have to fine-tune for example, with our measures in the area of the climate, to ensure that they are properly implemented as planned. And I'll speak more about that later, I think.
Follow up?
Sí, muchas gracias.
Thank you. The problem is that if we establish priorities, at the end of the day, when you add up the priorities for all the commissioners and all the member states, no doubt, as well as parliaments, the money doesn't add up and it becomes impossible. So there's a challenge for you there, and we do trust that you will help Parliament to obtain a successful outcome to the negotiations. Now, on the Sustainable Development Goals and the gender perspective you referred to earlier on, do you have any particular sort of methodology in mind? Any clear indicators that will allow us to assess the extent to which the multi-annual financial framework is actually delivering on those SDGs? In other words, with commitments entered into both by Parliament and by the President-elect.
Ja, zum Ersten.
Well, on the first point, I can announce to you and promise you that I will go to all of the different capitals, and I will make it my priority to go to those who have announced that they would rather have a low budget. I want to make it clear to them what is necessary, and I will also speak to the media. We need to find allies, and I have noticed some signs of movement from some of these hardliner countries. When they want to see better climate protection or better border protection, then these ideas are only possible if there is the necessary funding. As for gender equality, first of all, it's a question of policy design. On that basis, we've got a performance framework which has got or should have gender indicators. I'm thinking of Erasmus, research, just to cite some examples. And I'll say to you openly that if we identify shortcomings in the initial and midterm reviews, then we have to take the necessary adjustments.
Valérie Hayé, Renew.
Monsieur le Président, je vous remercie.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm over here, Mr. Hahn. I'd like to stress something that's very important for the European Parliament and which has already been mentioned, namely own resources. The Commission has put a number of options for own resources on the table. The CO2 emissions trade or the plastic option. Mrs. van der Leyen, for her part, has said that there'll be a carbon tax at our borders. Now, the European Parliament is very much in favour of green own resources and has been for some time. Now, in Council, the discussions on this are very much bogged down, timid at best. The Parliament has decided that it will link its... what do you think of the fact that Parliament is going to link its agreement to the MFF on green own resources? So we need to lift the block in Council, and we need precise answers to these questions. Which member states are blocking progress on green own resources? And secondly, what arguments are you going to put forward to try and change their minds? Will you really be able to pressure Council in order to get a result on this issue, which is fundamental for the future of the European Union?
Also, wie ich schon eingangs erwähnt,
as I said in my initial statement and in previous answers, there are a number of suggestions on the table for own resources, and some of them have already developed in the political discussion somewhat. We've got this issue of the plastic bag tax, for example. There's pretty much a consensus on that already. I think there's one country, Poland, that's a little bit hesitant, if I'm not mistaken, but I think we can overcome that issue. The other one is a larger part of the emission trading schemes auctions. Again, discussions here are progressing well. And then you have this very specific idea of extending the ETS scheme to other areas, for example, to aviation and maritime transport. again here, the Council, I think, is very much open to this. But it's not at all open for CCTB. The idea of a tax on multinationals, on their revenue. Here, the Council is very largely reluctant, and I think that we're going to have to put forward a new proposal in the future. Mrs. von der Leyen has talked about a cross-border carbon tax. That's something that the Council is very much open to, but it's going to be necessary to look at the specifics as to how that might work. So the plastic tax is the easiest to put, and the ETS are the easiest to put into practice in the short term.
Je vous remercie. Pardon.
Thank you. I apologize, but you're not really answering my questions, Mr. Hahn. You cited Poland. Okay, but I'm sure that other countries are also holding us back on this. Now, in your initial remarks, you said that the Parliament's position is very clear, but we won't agree to the MFF if there aren't new green own resources. If there is a blockage, then there may be need for a contingency plan extending the validity of the legal texts that allow programs to happen. Now, we asked you this in writing, but your answer wasn't satisfactory. So, I ask you now, can you guarantee that this sort of extension plan for programs will be put forward? And I'm not talking about Article 312 of the TFEU. So, what are you going to put in place then to protect the financial beneficiaries of the programs?
Nochmals, dass da kein Missverständnis.
Let me say again, because I don't want there to be any misunderstanding here. I think I'm even ahead of you when it comes to the issue of additional new own resources. The existing Commission proposal would see own resources share of the full budget go up from 28 to 35%. So that's my first point. Is there it looks like I've run over time. Can I carry on? Is that okay? Yes, and I say that the second question is terribly important. We need to work together to negotiate and then implement the MFF. The contingency plan or contingency measures that you've measured are something I consider to be a last resort, only to be used if we can't arrive at an agreement in good time. And I will certainly do my utmost to make sure that we do have an agreement in good time. And that means that we get a result towards the end of the winter. I really don't think it's appropriate to start talking about a plan B with deadlines now, because that would vent some of the pressure on negotiators. Please don't forget that if we propose a contingency measure, then the whole institutional system has to be involved in that, the Parliament and the Council, and they will have their views on that contingency as well. And that will distract people from the central aim, which is to get the MFF signed, sealed and delivered. We want to do more for climate change. We want to do more to protect our external borders. And if we have a contingency plan, we'll be delaying all that by 1 year. So I'm on your side. Let's put all our efforts into getting the MFF done, and rather than considering about this last resort of a contingency.
Thank you. Rasmus Andresen, Greens.
Talk in German, sehr geehrter Herr Hahn.
Mr. Hahn, people are worried about the problems of climate change and loss of biodiversity. That's one of the major challenges of our time. We're going to have to try and stop this climate crisis. This is only going to be possible if we construct our public budgets in a very different manner and change our financial system. It won't be sufficient to stick with our old policies. We're going to have to step up a gear. So what are your specific proposals for how this can be reflected in the MFF? Would you be prepared to go beyond the 25% that's already been agreed for climate investment in the MFF? Because I don't think just 25% of the budget is sufficient. And to be very concrete, would you respond to our call to create a European nature fund to try and stop extinction of species?
Also,
the current Commission has already made a proposal to set a proportion of climate expenditure at 25%. That's already an increase. It's a 25% increase already compared with the present situation. So that's already ambitious. But you're absolutely right. It's not the end of the road. It cannot be allowed to be the final limit. But let's see if we're in a position to see this 25% absorbed in the actual programs. In the agricultural area, 40% of the resources now have to be earmarked for climate-related issues. In the regional fund, it's 30%. In research, it's 35%. Neighborhood development, international development, it's 25%. Cohesion, 35%. Connecting Europe facility, 60%. So a lot has already been set forward. But now we need to look at the specific programs. We need to see how this works in the direct management or in shared management. Can we set these objectives at the program level? These are going to be what we discuss over the next few months, so we'll get an MFF up and running as soon as possible, so that we can then move on to the different sectoral regulations, and on that basis we can start the programming. Now, I've got a past as a Commissioner for Regional Affairs. I have seen plenty of situations where we've had absorption problems. So we've ended up falling 2 years behind the original programming. I don't want to see that repeated. If we want to implement our ambitious goals, then we have to continue to discuss these issues. Please give the negotiators some space to use the priorities within the programs. If there's a broad agreement that adjustments are required, then of course I will be open to you.
Vielen Dank.
Thank you very much. Well, I don't think you really answered the more concrete aspects of my question. But besides the issue of investment, there's also the question of how we're spending the money now. Is our budget already climate friendly, or can it be made more climate friendly? Subsidies for fossil fuels are financed directly by the EU budget. But a lot of companies are divesting from fossil fuel assets. In this House, we need we need to do our homework. There are coal projects involving the energy company RWE. There's the European coal lobby, which is receiving money from the European budget. Would you be prepared to divest the EU budget so that with the EU budget we should not be supporting fossil fuels?
Also das ist ja genau die
Well, that's precisely the objective of the Just Transition Fund. We want to support those regions that have high CO2 emissions because they are largely coal-powered. We want to help them so that they can move away from these forms of energy production and move towards other energy sources, and so that they can develop other economic sectors. Now, there are resources already through the European social funds for retraining of workers in those sectors. We quite often see these kind of coal power plants situated in regions where mining is also most intensive. So what we're going to have to do is retrain a lot of workers. That's the objective of the Just Transition Fund. It's not going to be enough on its own, though. With some very clear programming in terms of structural funds and cohesion funds, I think that we can achieve a lot of the justified objectives that you've put forward. I'm discussing with Commissioner Timmermans to try and be consistent, to try and ensure that our funding streams don't contradict one another.
Okay, Joachim Kuss, ID.
Okay, ich bin hier. Vielen Dank, Herr Vorsitzender.
Thank you. Yes, I'm also going to speak German, Mr. Hahn. I'm not looking for more money from you, but rather less. My concern is elsewhere. I'm a member of the Budget Committee and the Budget Control Committee, and I regularly see that cooperation between the Parliament and the Council is rather difficult. We can see that the discharge in Article 261 of the financial regulations has been refused by the Parliament for the last 9 years. I therefore ask, what measures will you put in place in order to improve this cooperation such that the discharge can actually be accorded in the future?
Sprechen Sie die Beschleunigung des Entlastungs.
Are you talking about accelerating the discharge? No, I'm talking about discharge at all. There's been no discharge. The Council hasn't been discharged by the Parliament for 9 years.
Und das auch, also in Artikel, ich lese Ihnen gerade Artikel 261.
Article 261 says that the Parliament's discharge covers all revenue and expenditure of the Union, and the Union covers all institutions. The Council also has to have a discharge, and it refuses to cooperate on that. Well, I have to say you've caught me out there. I will have to look into this. That can't be acceptable. I've always been involved in the discharge for the Commission's accounts, and things have developed very positively in the past there. And I think that we can be quite proud of that, because that is, in part, thanks to the work of the Budgetary Control Committee here in the Parliament. But since I'm responsible for the whole of the budget, I will certainly not hesitate to get in touch with the Council in order to make sure that this state of affairs comes to an end.
Yes, a short question afterwards. Wenn wir, also Sie haben vorhin betont, Herr Hahn.
Mr. Hahn, you said that you want to make sure the Commission is accountable and transparent, and you want to be a good example. I'm happy to see that you would take that seriously, but let me ask you, how can this transparency and independence and accountability be guaranteed in the future? We can't advocate on behalf of taxpayers if we don't stick to the rules and the rule of law ourselves. I would therefore ask for you to act on that as a matter of urgency.
Jetzt. Also, point taken. Ich werde mich ja mit.
Well, point taken. I will address that. The Parliament has the lead on this issue, and we do need to generate public support for this, to raise awareness about this, because the taxpayer is not going to be able to understand why this is happening, and I think that that will help push us to a more rapid solution. Thank you very much. I'm over here, Commissioner. I'm from Poland and I will be speaking Polish. I wanted to refer back to some of the questions we've already heard. In her meeting with the Polish Prime Minister, Mrs. van der Leyen said that, and I quote, large investment is going to be needed in those areas that are going to have to use new technology and create new jobs. And that's why the Just Transition Fund is being created, in order to support these regions. End of quote. Now, in your written answers to the European Parliament, you also said, and I quote, that you see the need for legislative proposals in the Just Transition Fund aimed at achieving climate goals. There are places in Europe that needs clean investment. So I wonder if you can say a little bit more about this fund. How's it going to be built up, and how is the allocation of funds going to be organised?
Dazu gibt es, also die Zielsetzung dieses Fonds ist noch.
The aim of this fund is to support regions that generate energy that emits a lot of CO2, or to support those regions that have industries that emit a lot of CO2. The Just Transition Fund aims to support them to reduce that dependence on CO2. So either to offer them or help them with a technological upgrade so that CO2's emissions can be brought down, or so they can shift to other industries. And of course, social measures will be in place as well, like retraining of workers and what have you. We will put funds into that. Logically, monies from the structural funds will be included. There'll be money from the member states. And we need to create, for example, seed financing. It may also be that member states have to regulate and that state aid rules have to be changed so that we can trigger investment, accelerate the whole process, and that the fund can then be a catalyst in order to drive development forward. Again, let me say, the fund on its own will not be enough. In pretty much every region of Europe, we need to act and invest in order to combat climate change. And that's why there are funds available for all regions of Europe. You have structural funds, cohesion funds, rural development funds. All of those have to be directed as well in the same direction.
Tak, bardzo dziękuję.
Thank you very much. We've got clean investment then. I'm happy to hear what you say about that. Let me ask one other thing. Yesterday, I was listening to Elisa Ferreira, who's candidate as the Regional Affairs Commissioner, and she was talking about areas with low levels of population. There are some wonderful mountains, like the Carpathians, which are on the borders of different countries. Could you imagine the support to infrastructure in areas like the Carpathian Mountains, or, for example, a north-south road similar to like the one in Finland? I'm thinking particularly of the Carpathian because it's a cross-border area where infrastructure is needed, because that would help develop this very beautiful corner of Europe.
Also wenn ich aus meiner Erinnerung
I was regional commissioner, and as I recall, you're talking about a macro-regional strategy for the Carpathians. Is that right? Well, I would have to look into the details of that, but there's one key word that you mentioned. It's very, very important, particularly for the new member states, to invest in the railways. In preparing for today's hearing and my future post, if you confirm me, I found out that upgrading railway tracks to, for example, high-speed tracks could lead to trains replacing short flights, but that's not categorized as being a measure which could reduce climate change. But of course it is. We have to get people into the trains. So that's something that we need to address, and I will be bringing in specific measures to do that. We have to be clearer in the way we set out programs, because then I think a lot of very meaningful projects will come to life.
First round of questions. We now move to the second round with the same rules, and I pass the word to Mr. Siegfried Muresan, EPP. Oh, sorry, I made a mistake. Apologies. My apologies. First, Elena Kuntura Gue.
Thank you, Chairman. I will speak in Greek. Mr. Hahn, the cohesion policy of the European Union was created in order to cover a specific need, to support the weakest regions, to shield them in order to be in a position to be competitive in a single market without any borders. The completion of the single market is moving fast in the last decades. However, the outgoing Commission, of which you were a member, proposed a cut of cohesion policy by 10%. Do you believe, Mr. Hahn, that the cohesion policy loses its reason to exist? And if not, how will you assure that the cohesion funds will not be cut? And the second point I would like to raise, the next MFF should be compatible with our climate objectives. We must assure, however, that the achievement of our environment objectives will be fair for all, especially for the economically weakest, and for those working in areas with a larger carbon footprint. How will you cover through the budget the needs of these groups? The Just Transition Fund, will it be sufficient? Thank you.
Well, again, as former Commissioner for Regional Affairs, and temporarily, once again, the Commissioner for Regional Affairs, I can tell you that the reduction is not 10%, it's less, but any cut hurts. Of course, it would be nicer to have more, but we decided in the current Commission, after long negotiations, that we would need to modernize the MFF, and we need to make compromises. If we want to spend more on research, If we want to spend more for our neighbourhood policy, to try and strengthen Europe itself, if we want to invest more in fighting climate change, then we're going to have to make redeployments. But on the other hand, you're absolutely right that the objective of cohesion policy is that the weaker regions should be able to catch up. So, fortunately, there have been positive movements in that direction. But at the end of the day, I think we've ended up with a fair, balanced proposal. I've repeatedly referred to the potential of the Just Transition Fund. If I remember rightly, there are two regions that I have in mind in Greece. Peloponnesus, for example. These regions would benefit from these funds. There are specific projects, and I'm convinced that the Greek side has some specific proposals to make as to how these resources could be used sensibly so that CO2 emissions can be significantly reduced.
Mr. Hahn, I would like to raise the important issue of tourism. Europe is the #1 tourist destination in the world. Tourism is a pillar of the economy and a catalyst for the growth of many economic sectors. It constitutes 10% of the European GDP. It supports millions of jobs, especially in remote and insular areas, not having access to other economic activities. The European Parliament has pressed for the inclusion of tourism in the next MFF, with a symbolic amount, I would say, which is far lower than the real needs. These needs, in order to avoid misunderstandings, do not concern the financing of private companies that have access to other European funds. We need a European policy for tourism and a mechanism for management, for crisis management in destinations in the extreme weather phenomenon cases that are being aggravated by the change of the climate, security issues that we have lived many such problems of security recently, and other man-created problems such as migration. But in order to rescue many jobs in the cases of a destruction of big tourist colossus, do you recognize the importance of tourism for the economy and jobs? Are you going to support the inclusion of tourism in the next MFF? Do you undertake this commitment?
Well, like you, I come from a country that is heavily dependent on tourism. And you're absolutely right. Tourism is the third largest economic sector in Europe. So it's only right that we should be active in ensuring that things continue to develop well. In the area of tourism, there are quite a lot of challenges to face. There are destinations that are complaining that they're getting too many tourists. So the important thing is we need some kind of sustainable approach to our own tourist destinations. And we also need to consider the interests of our own citizens. We have to bring all of those interests into balance. As Regional Affairs Commissioner, I was heavily involved in the idea that we have to invest in tourism, and I had to convince my own staff about that. Tourism is not a European competence, but when it comes to our funding policies, structural funds can play a key role in the sector. I don't know if you remember that in Greece, a lot of money was invested to try and make tourist destinations more attractive and to make them more sustainable as well. That's the sort of thing we've done in the past, and we will continue to do so in the future, if the member states so wish. We will ensure that any investments in that sector are also linked to our climate objectives. There are quite a lot of different possibilities as to how this can all be brought into balance.
For real, we end the first tour and we start with the second tour, but before passing the word to Mr. Mureşan, please take notice of the time slots. We're already running a quarter of an hour over time. Please respect the 1 minute, 2 minute, 1 minute, 1 minute schedule. Mr. Mureşan, EPP.
Thank you, Chairman. Commissioner, welcome to Parliament. If you will receive the approval of this House to become Budgets Commissioner, you will lead the work on the adoption of a 7-year multi-annual financial framework and on 5 yearly budgets of the European Union. Much was said about the MFF. I would like to talk to you about the yearly budget procedure and about the rights of the Parliament. Experience of recent years shows that the Council is never ready to negotiate with Parliament until the very last days of the budgetary procedure. That affects the interinstitutional work process significantly, and it also leads to a perception to the outside world that there is a problem. We tried to change this 2018 when I was the General Rapporteur for the budget with your predecessor, but there was resistance on the side of the Council. My question is, are you ready to take up the fight with the Council so that they come early to the negotiating table? And from your experience as a minister, what does it take to do this? And my second question, Commissioner, is when the positions of Parliament and Council are divergent, we need a Commission which is an honest broker. Do you commit to being an honest broker between Parliament and Council and to always say the same things to Council and Parliament? Because in the past, predecessors of yours have told different things to Parliament and Council just to please us and just for us to find out afterwards that reality was different. Thank you.
Big challenge, but I definitely, I will try my best, and I think I can refer to a track record over the past 10 years to be an honest broker, to facilitate solutions, to come to solutions. Usually I promise less, but I try to deliver more. And this will be also my, so to say, approach and my attitude for the next 5 years. And I fully agree and I fully understand your dissatisfaction, and it's, I have not lived it on my own, but looking into the, so to say, documents and the reports, it's really unsatisfying if you have a conciliatory time frame, but this time frame is not used, but at the end of the day, in the very last moment, they are quasi fait accomplis. And I will do everything to avoid this, to set up different meetings, and or at least to push for different meetings, but not only to push for different meetings, but also trying to figure out what are technical issues which can be resolved quickly, what are less highly political issues which can also be resolved faster, in order to end up finally only on the 2-3 main topics which apparently are, so to say, contested or challenged by the Council or by the Parliament, in order to have really to use these 3 weeks in order to get an agreement. I cannot promise it works or it will work, but be reassured I will do everything, because it's also not satisfying for me and my team if the situation is like it was, for instance, last year.
Follow-up?
Thank you very much, Chairman. Commissioner, at the beginning of the next MFF, most likely we will still be facing payments to the EU beneficiaries of every sort from the previous MFF because of the low speed at which the project started, particularly in the area of cohesion policy. And there is no worse signal that the European Union can give to the beneficiaries than us having a huge payment log and not being able to pay our bills to the beneficiaries quickly. The 2 questions to you are, what will you do in order to minimize the negative effects of such a payment backlog to the beneficiaries? And secondly, in the work on the MFF, you know, also from your experience as Commissioner for Regional Policy, what are the lessons learned so that at the beginning of the MFF, the absorption starts quicker so that we do not have the problem of the payments backlog at the end of the MFF?
Unfortunately, I have only 1 minute. Concerning the first, thanks to the Parliament and your tough negotiations last time, you have introduced flexibility instruments, and these flexibility instruments, I'm very general, can be used in case there are payment constraints. Number one. Number two, what you have said is another, so to say, proof and example that we need a fast and quick agreement on the MFF, because last time, the fact that we agreed, or the decision was only taken 2 weeks before the expiring date, caused the well-known backlogs, because it took a couple of months to agree about the sectorial programs, and on top of this, we had delays in the programming. So the faster we are, and this is why we are so pushing hard, the earlier we can enter into concrete implementation, can pursue all our political aims. Another example why we should, so to say, push and focus as much as possible on getting an MFF agreement.
Thank you. Elisabetta Gualmini, S&D.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. Hahn, I go back to the own resources revision. You already have talked a lot about that, but you may understand this is an important topic for us. So Ursula von der Leyen, the president-elect, in her guidelines mentioned both the digital tax, which could respond to, the goals of social justice and tax fairness, and the new carbon burden tax, which you have already spoken about. So also the digital tax could eventually be linked to the CCCBT for multinationals, so it is a very important subject for us. So do you really think that in concrete these two specific own resources could be added to the range of the own resources already sketched out and proposed by the Commission 1 year ago?
It could, and it should be added. What I have sensed so far and what I have read and heard, there is, so to say, an openness on the cross-border carbon tax. Of course, it's an idea which is floating around in Europe from different areas. I think we all have a lot of sympathy for this, and we should further explore how to really design it, structure it, and finally implement it. So this is where I'm rather positive. As I have already said in a previous answer on this digital tax, there is a lot of reluctance in some member states. I think we should not give up, because there is, it would be unfair if big international companies, and I look to my, may I say, friend, Mr. Schieder, it would be unfair if big international companies can escape. Yeah? Maybe we have to redefine a possible approach in order to meet the concerns. But again, we should not give up. And if we can raise money from this source, of course, it should be ring-fenced to climate-related initiatives.
Follow-up?
Doesn't work. Yeah. Okay. So thank you very much. Going again on the own resources, this is more a cultural question. So of course, if we are able to introduce real European own resources together with the reduction of course, GNI contributions, I think we can create a sort of a paradigm shift. So a real Europeanization of, budgetary policy. So it's not to tell the member states, hey, we want more money from you because we won't be elected again, so this is a problem. But it is to create a common cultural field and revenues which are strictly linked to the political priorities of the new European institutions we are going to, to occupy in these 5 years. So I really ask you, will you work strongly with the Council in order to promote this kind of approach, and I particularly appreciated the link you made in your presentation between the own resources revision and the more general MFF negotiations. Thank you.
I fully subscribe to what you have said. I think in an ideal world, we should gradually increase the share of own resources on the overall budget, but it should not seen as a quasi one-to-one compensation. So there should something on top, so gradually increase, but certainly also reduce the GNI share on the overall budget. But it's also, there's another reason why I'm so very much in favor of own resources, not only from, if you like, a financial aspect, but also from a, how should I say, mentality-rated or atmospheric. I would like to overcome this division between net contributors and beneficiaries. In my country, I think 95% or more of taxes and levies are collected on the national level, and all the different regions actually don't have a real clue if a region is contributing or getting more when it is redistributed. And this would be ideal if we would end up in Europe at the level where we don't differentiate. And by the way, the current budget commissioner Oettinger is always saying this differentiation between beneficiaries and net contributors is no longer valid in the way it is described today, because net contributors very often benefit from investments in beneficiary countries. So the issues are a little bit more interlinked, and this should be acknowledged.
Thank you. Olivier Chastel, Renew.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chairman. Commissioner Designate, in your initial presentation, you mentioned the rule of law. For us, it's crucial, as it is for all European citizens, and the European Union indeed has instruments to ensure that these values are properly implemented, but there's no effective rapid reaction today. The Commission, indeed, as part of the forthcoming MFF, is proposing a specific mechanism to protect the financial interests of the Union, which would be invoked should the rule of law in general decline in any given member state, which will be subject to financial penalties. When you touched on the subject earlier on, you were talking more in terms of protecting the Union's budget. What I would like to know is whether you can enter into a formal commitment to get this mechanism working so that it can react swiftly and effectively if there are failings on the rule of law in a given member state. And what initiatives will you take to get decision taking, and what sort of time frame would we be looking at? And then lastly, as that mechanism would have to revolve around the key elements of the financial regulation, I'd like to know how you think this would fit in with conflict of interest, and that's Article 61, and the suspension of payments and interruption of payments where there are severe instances of failings under Article 68.
Was die Finanzregulation anbelangt, bezieht sich das...
Well, as for the financial regulation, Article 61, which entered into force in 2018, creates a new possibility. If there is a perceived conflict of interest, then that in itself would lead to financial corrections, and the money would have to be paid back. Now, what you're really referring to here is the idea of introducing a rule of law mechanism. So where there are deficiencies in the area of the rule of law in a member state, that would mean that the regularity of EU payments would not be ensured, and that would lead to a situation where a procedure would be initiated. It shouldn't be understood as being a punishment. Rather, it should be considered to be a safeguard for EU money. If the necessary preconditions are not in place in the national administration, then financial corrections may take place. I'll give you an example. If there are shortcomings in collecting VAT, then in that case, when this rule enters into force, then it's possible to intervene, because part of the VAT is an own resource. That's already the case. It's an own resource for the EU budget. If there are difficulties or deficiencies in collection of VAT, then that's one thing. But if it's corporate taxation, then we don't have any possibility of intervening, because that's nothing to do with EU2 money. The fundamental condition is whether EU revenue is affected.
Thank you for that reply, Commissioner. I've heard nothing actually regarding the time frame for the rollout of this new regulation, this new measure. But I've a further point. How will the Commission implement the new regulation when at the same time it's going to have to draft the annual activity report of its various DGs, Regio, Agri, and Employment, and therefore shoulder sole responsibility for shedding light on the general failings of the member states with this respect? Are you prepared to work together with Olaf, Europol, Eurojust, the European Public Prosecutor's Office, to make sure we have consistency here, linking this to the rule of law, the upholding of democracy and fundamental rights in Europe?
Zum Ersten, ich nehme an, Sie...
Well, first of all, I'm assuming that what you're referring to is that it has to be ensured that this rule should be dealt with through a separate regulation and shouldn't be part of the MFF, and it shouldn't figure in the negotiations. I will do everything in my power to ensure that this is the case. It is something separate. It is not part of the upcoming MFF, and it should not be restricted to that. It should remain valid even beyond the next MFF. That should be our objective, and that's what we're working on. On the second part of your question, we work together very closely with Olaf. Olaf and the audit departments within the European Commission have got more than 500 staff members that are involved only with auditing. You've got 200 or 300 in the Commission, and you've got 30 or 40 odd in Olaf. They are enough to deal with all of this. I think my time's up.
Thank you. Angelika Winzig, EPP.
Vielen Dank.
Yes.
Sie haben die
Thank you very much, Commissioner. Well, the deadline for the MFF is a tough one. Any further delays in getting an agreement on the FFF are a risk because the Parliament and Council may not be able to conclude on time. But the Parliament, when we're under time pressure, we're still not a party that will agree to a bad agreement. So would you have a short-term extension of the ceilings in the current MFF? Is that what you plan? Well, this will only be possible if the necessary measures are taken at the operation and legislative level. So that's why the Parliament is asking for the Commission to put forward a contingency plan. What's your view of the drafting of a contingency plan? And do you feel bound to take all necessary measures if this contingency plan is to be set up in a timely manner?
Nochmals, ich glaube, es hat sich...
Well, here we are again, because we've already touched upon this in the debate. It's in our interest to get the MFF done and dusted in good time, so that we can pursue our political objectives, we can modernize the budget. We cannot tolerate any delay. That has to be the center of our attention. But I'll be honest with you, the Commission has to be prepared. Staff are, of course, preparing emergency measures the event that we don't get a timely agreement. But as I said earlier on, if you were going to have a proposal from us, that would set off a whole institutional flurry of activity that the Parliament and Council would then have to study those plans. It would be a legislative text, and that would distract us from our main objective, which is to get a final agreement on the MFF in good time. It would take up resources in the Parliament, in the Council, in the Commission, and in the Member States. So let's focus our attention. I can certainly promise you that if a situation like that were to occur, then we will be putting forward the necessary draft text. But to announce it now and to present it now, well, that would take a bit of pressure off the MFF negotiations, and I don't think that that would be in the interest of our common objectives. So, I'll say it again, any delay in getting the MFF up and running will mean a delay in implementing our shared political objectives.
Follow up?
Ja, das Parlament fordert, dass zur Halbzeit des MFF
At the midterm of the MFF, there's going to be a thorough review, and there'll be a legally binding reworking. It'll be called the midterm revision. But, of course, that is to take into account unexpected new developments. Will you support the Parliament's position on the midterm review, and what will be your methodology if there is not success in achieving the objectives?
Bei Midterm Review kann ich ganz kurz sein.
Well, I can be very brief on the midterm review. Full support. Yes, it should take place. It makes sense. And as far as the time frame is concerned, as we see it, I think that we need a little bit more flexibility so that we don't just wait for the midterm review. As soon as we recognize that one program or other is not being properly absorbed or achieving the desired effect, then, of course, we have to work on the indicators. Less is more, of course. So we have to be doing this before the midterm review. And if there are any necessary adjustments to be made before then, that would also make sense. And I'd like to thank the Parliament in advance for its calls for more flexibility in the multi-annual financial framework.
Mislav Kolakusic, non-attached.
Hvala vam. Poštovani.
Thank you. Mr. Hahn, during the past decade, you were Commissioner of the European Commission in two different portfolios. One of them was regional policy and the other one enlargement. And now you've been proposed to be a Commissioner in the third term of office to be in charge of the budget portfolio. This is why I believe that you are the right person who can provide us with an answer to the following question. What are you going to do in order to ensure that the funds from the European budget are more evenly distributed to member states? I'll give you several examples. From 2014 until 2018, so in the past 5 years, Romania and Hungary have a surplus of 22 billion euro. Poland has a surplus of 51 billion euro. The Republic of Croatia, if we compare it with these countries, has received 12 times less. In other words, 28 times less than Poland. So, here you can see some ratios, 0.5 up to 10 times more funds that are received by certain beneficiaries compared to their contributions. And we can't conclude that this is related to the absorption capacity. For example, Ireland had much more funds that it received, and later on it was in the minus. Thank you.
Also, mir ist diese Diskussion.
Well, I'm familiar with this discussion, and in fact, because I was talking to your Prime Minister just last week, I have some figures I can share with you. You're talking about distribution of the structural funds, and that distribution is based on a fairly complex calculation. I think 80 or 85% is based on the current cost of living and the employment situation in a given place. I think the Commission's currently proposing that there be a small percentage calculated according to how many migrants are taken on or not. For the cost of living, we use Eurostat statistical data. But anyway, to get to the point, what I'm saying is everyone can probably expect cuts, because these countries have reached the goal that was catching up in terms of the standard of living. Croatia has the second or third highest per capita allocation from structural funds, at least for the next funding period. I know that cuts always hurt, but in the European overview, Croatia's doing fairly well. Certainly when it comes to an attempt to distribute funds fairly.
Imam još jedno kratko potpitanje.
Yes, I do have a short question. This is a principled question. I personally believe that a limitation to 2 terms of office for political functions that are not a result of elections should be something that is enough. 2 terms of office should be enough. And now you're running for your 3rd term of office. What is your opinion? Should we have this limitation of just 2 terms of office, or can you be a commissioner indefinitely? Thank you.
Also, ich habe nicht vor, mich in diese Diskussion einzumischen.
Well, I wasn't going to get into that discussion. I am a candidate for a 3rd term of office. I intend to serve my country by doing so. I think it doesn't hurt in politics to have a certain amount of experience. We always do slightly different things over the years in politics, but we build on past experience, I beg your pardon, and that experience serves citizens. I think as far as transparency and performance goes, people can better judge someone who's already done the job than someone who hasn't done the job. I think also if it's the right person, and I think I am, then that person can still show the required commitment and enthusiasm, and they shouldn't be held back, because there aren't that many of us.
Mr. Commissioner, we know each other from our work in the city of Vienna, so the next question will not surprise you on gender budgeting and gender mainstreaming. Thank you for mentioning it in your introductory speech. You know, since the joint declaration to the current MFF, 5 years have passed and we have made absolutely no progress. We have still no gender equality strategy in the MFF. We lack gender disaggregated data. We lack gender-specific measurable indicators, it was already mentioned, and we lack gender budget impact assessment. And I think this is unacceptable. And in your written answers to the European Parliament, you already stated, and I thank you for that, the importance of gender equality, but you didn't say how you want to concrete implement gender budgeting in the next term. So I want to ask you, how are your or will be your concrete steps to make gender budgeting an integral part of the EU budget and the MFF with binding rules and proper and effective monitoring?
Well, I have to admit, if we are talking about, for instance, the future heading 7 administration, EU administration, it's easier for us to look into all this and to be more precise, because this is directly controlled by us. As I told you, 80% of our budget is spent via shared management and in different policy areas. And I fully subscribe to your criticism. We have to work on this. I think it's important to integrate in our impact assessment indeed gender-oriented elements in our policy design. This has to be done. And of course, in our performance framework, we have to look into specific indicators which give an indication where we are. But here we have to look policy by policy. Not everything can be treated equally, but nevertheless, I have every interest to have more aggregated figures in order to get a better survey about where we are, so to say, in terms of implementing gender equality via our budget, via our member states, via our partners, and this is something where we definitely have to work. And I really would like to invite the Parliament. I will come to you to sit together, to work together in a respecting informal, formal way, working group, to look which kind of measures can be taken in order to now really achieve our goals. I agree, there we are lagging behind, but it's also due to the complexity of the way how we spend money, in particular via many projects in the way of shared management.
Follow-up?
And yeah, sorry.
Thank you very much for your answer, and also, of course, the invitation. We come back to that, of course, and develop with you concrete steps. And thank you for mentioning staff, because in your portfolio is not only budget, it's also administration. And in 2017, the European Commission adopted a diversity and inclusion charter to create a better workplace for all, including women, staff with disabilities, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transsexual, and intersex LGBTI staff and older staff. So what specific activities do you foresee for the next 5 years to make the European Commission a more inclusive workplace, especially for LGBTIQ people, and especially given the cases of sexual harassment?
I mean, if you have 30,000 staff people, there are always cases, and unfortunately there will always be cases, even we don't like it. If I look at the annual staff survey, the satisfaction of our staff people is very high. But each individual case is one case too much. And therefore, we have to train our people, we have to train our management. This is work in progress. It's about having the necessary sensibility. We have created, based on the already mentioned strategy, respective contact points for LGBTI person. The same, by the way, applies for disabled person, and to give them help, to give them assistance when they came into the Commission, but also during their stay in the Commission. if it's about disabled people, also to help them, for instance, with their, if they have if staff members have disabled children, also for that we are looking into additional support. So I think we have started to implement, and once again, looking into the staff survey report, I think we have a very high level of satisfaction, but there's always room for improvement.
Thank you. Clotilde Armand, Renew.
Monsieur le Commissaire, je reviens sur...
Commissioner, I want to come back on the transition fund help aimed at the eastern countries and combating climate change. You support that, that's good, but there is still a difference in social and economic, but also climatic terms between East and West. You can see that Western Europe is relatively green and Eastern Europe is relatively red if you map out pollution. Now let me turn to the funding of the Just Transition Fund. You talked about adjustments, you talked about the structural fund. Do you know how the structural funds are used? They're used to treat water, they're used for basic infrastructure. Now we'd be very happy if there was a railway or a motorway between the East and West. You seem to be talking in utopian terms. The structural funds for Bulgaria and Romania over 7 years will not be enough to fund a high-speed railway from Bucharest to the border, and it wouldn't be profitable either. So my question is, will you find new money to meet the climate change challenge in the East, or will you be simply taking from Peter to pay Pavel?
Also, ich kann Ihnen sagen, wie ich 2010 hierher...
Well, when I came to this Parliament in 2010, I found budget money available for renewable energies. And in Eastern Europe and parts of Western Europe, that budget was not being used. And I travelled around Europe for a year promoting the use of these monies. 5 years later, the mood had changed in the new member states. The new member states were ready to invest in energy efficiency in homes. They were putting in insulation because they were understanding that it wasn't just about climate change, that the people who live in poorly insulated homes are the poorer people in the country, and if you can reduce their energy bills, then you've actually made a contribution to improving their social welfare. It's also something that creates jobs. You're from France, and we've the first thermal insulation experiment was in France many years ago, and it ended up creating a lot of jobs in France. As I've said a few times today, it's up to us how we program the structural funds, the detail we put into it, how tough we are about the priorities that we set. If we're going to invest in climate relevant areas, then we'll be able to do that. Waste treatment, for example, is an area where we create pollution. The cleanness of river water is another area. Flood damage is another example. The member states and the regions have to identify very precisely where we need to invest in order to achieve our goals. I think the money is there. Don't look at the low absorption rate. That's something for later.
Comisar, sunt din România, din țara mea. Și cum știți, și cum știți din
Now, in my own country, as you may be aware, you've already been commissioner twice, of course. In my country, Romania, we haven't had the capacity to absorb the funding for basic infrastructure. Some projects have succeeded, but not all of them. How can we get engaged in more complex environmental projects if the strategy doesn't change? If the strategy doesn't change, we'll end up with the same result. That's to say, without basic infrastructure, without green infrastructure, how can we change strategy?
Also, weder kann noch will ich die Arbeit.
I cannot, nor do I wish to do the work that is within the remit of the future Commissioner for Regional Affairs. However, as a member of the college and as former Commissioner for Regional Affairs, and if you confirm me Commissioner for Budget Affairs, then I will do what I tried to say over the last 2 hours that I will do, namely that we try to implement our political goals as a commission together, and that programming, that the implementation tallies with the goals that we have set. If we can do that, I think we'll achieve a lot. We have to help some countries, Romania is one of them, to improve their take-up rate so that the money available is actually used. Because, if you like, that's almost a bigger problem. The money's there, but it's not being taken up. So in the future, we have to make sure the programs are right and that the money is then used.
Vielen herzlichen Dank, Herr Kommissar.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. Now, as chair of the Budgetary Control Committee, I'm going to take over, and I will be giving the floor to a Budget Committee. Why am I doing that? Because it's the chair of the Budget Committee himself, Johannes van der Overveld.
There's the following scenario. Suppose that the Council does not reach an agreement on the MFF and on resources somewhere next year. Suppose also that the MFF that is finally agreed upon is substantially lower than your proposal. And then there will, of course, be cuts. The proposals of the President-elect will be partially in it, but also will that mean that there will be further cuts in that scenario? And last but not least, as an hypothesis, no new own resources. That would, of course, go very bad down in Parliament here, to say the least, and would also be at odds with what the former Commission and the new Commission is putting forward as an objective. Will you then side with the Council to explain to us that this is the best deal we can get? Or will you defend a more ambitious political project and push the Council to open real and new negotiations? Or will you put the pressure on Parliament and give us finally then the blame for the risk of a shutdown?
Ich glaube, in der Psychologie spricht man von Suggestivfrage.
Well, in psychology, we talk about suggestion. If you know me, I say it quite often, I'm not only the member of a political party, but I'm also a member of the half-full glass party and not the half-empty glass party. I won't simply be letting this go. I will go to the member states and I will go to the media and I will be difficult. I will particularly go to those countries that are reticent and try and explain to them what's at stake. Across Europe, in our population, I can see a clear need for investment in the climate sector, investments for security, investments for a future-orientated, competitive economy. There's a need for investment in research, investment to support startups, for example. All of that simply can't take place if there is less money available. We are allies. As we see it, there are red lines. I can't imagine any kind of agreement that would be lower than the Commission's proposal. In that case, we simply would not be able to implement our objectives. These will be tough political discussions. But if we act together, the key word is half full glass.
Thank you. I'd like to take the opportunity also to throw up another issue and trying to make a bridge between your former job and your new job, if confirmed. You've been working a lot on, let's say, the border issues of Europe, the migration question, the Balkan strategy. And since this Commission is also very much emphasizing geopolitical aspects of the work that needs to be done, how do you see that with the present budget to reconcile the budget situation with having ambition on the geopolitical scene and especially in the larger neighborhood of the EU?
I'm not hungry and I'm not asking for another hearing, but because one should say and could say a lot about this. I think the current Commission has proposed an increase for the whole RELEX budget of around, if I'm not wrong in mind, 24%, and with three main areas of intervention. One is the West Balkan, for enlargement, pre-accession. Second, neighborhood. And third, Africa. And this is exactly the area where we as Europeans have a particular interest. And this is also one of the examples where we have, in particular, those member states which are more reluctant to convince and to explain why it is necessary to invest in Africa. I'm always saying the external border, the protection of our external border starts not only at the external border, it starts far beyond. It's about helping each individual African country to become more resilient. 1 minute is over. Once again, I could tell you a lot after 5 years of experience in this field, but I think we have started and initiated a lot, and I hope that successes will continue in this area.
Vielen herzlichen Dank, Herr Kommissar. Nun kommen wir zum...
Thank you, Commissioner. That brings us to the first representative from the Budgetary Control Committee, Mr. Stikowski.
Commissioner, I would like to ask you one question, but I will start with general point. Who was never in Cont Committee, never know what is it, the hell. Also, welcome in our committee and in our hearings. I think that grilling this barbecue party will show you that our questions are not very easy. But over the past year, the European Commission services and bodies have initiated a number of investigations of EU financial fraud and analysis of conflict of interest, which lead to further administrative and even legal actions at national level that would probably not be taken otherwise. As such, the Commission has provided much needed independent oversight on how the EU budget is used. My question is, how many financial and personnel resources do you plan to dedicate to auditing and investigation of the misuse of the EU budget in the Member States? The data reported by Member States authorities involved with the management of European funds are not always reliable, and the Commission often has to revise it. Do you plan to strengthen the auditing capability of the Commission? Thank you very much.
First, I had the pleasure in the last 10 years to appear at the Cont Committee several times. So, not in the Budget Committee, but Cont Committee. And I'm more than happy if we can continue. As I said already, currently we have more than 500 people in the European institutions dealing with audits. We have 385 at Olaf. We have people in DG Regio, we have people DG Employment, DG Agri, in the general services, so it amounts to probably 300 to 400. I think we are quite successful in detecting irregularities. But I would also like to use the opportunity to say that we are talking always about the very famous error rate, and many people quasi mix up error with fraud. And thanks God, the share of fraud amongst errors is less than 1%. But it's too much. Yeah? 0 would be ideal. But it's important for me to distinguish between error and fraud. But even if there's error, there have to be financial corrections. And one of the reasons why we have still errors, why there is always a risk of errors, is indeed that sometimes our regulations are too complex, too difficult, and one big issue is to simplify. And this notion simplification accompanies me since I'm here. Again, this time, I think in cohesion policy, they have proposed 80 simplifications. It's now up to the negotiations in the trilogue, how many of them will be taken on board. It's about lump sums, it's about eligibility of VAT, it's simply addressing, or it's simply aiming to reduce the risk of making errors and therefore preventing final beneficiaries for facing different difficulties. So I think we are on a good path, but still more has to be done, and I also count on you in your trilogue negotiations to accept this concept of simplification.
Follow up.
Okay. Thank you very much for your explanation. But the second question linked to the Olaf. Will the Olaf, a body with the reputation of a fully independent investigator to the EU fraud, be able to continue performing its duties if Olaf investigators are gradually transferred to EPPO, which will be given another important but different task? This is my first question. And second question is linked to the conflict of interest. Commissioner, there are many member states who have big problem with conflict of interest, high-level politicians. Also, what you will be with this situation and how you will respond the authorities in many republics would have this problem.
Herr Kommissar.
1 minute. Concerning the staff of Olaf and EPPO, they in a way have to work together. They will work together. Probably you refer to an agreement of Mrs. Georgieva, Mr. Asselborn from the past about the deployment and transfer of staff. This was, I think, in 2015 or 16, based on, at that time, a Commission proposal concerning the structure of the future EPO. In the meantime, there have been now the regulations in place. Due to the negotiations, the character of EPO has a little bit changed. So the staff needs have therefore also to be adapted. This has been the case. And now it's necessary that EPO can start up and running. And then we will see what are the additional needs. But may I say in general, Olaf is extremely important for its investigative work. It's important, and I think that, and this will be the case also in the future, the huge part of Olaf people will stay in Brussels. I think this should be the main message. For different reasons, I don't have the time. May I ask? So briefly, you refer to a special case. We know about what you mean. There are no financial damages for the European budget. We have stopped any kind of payments, or the other way around. We have agreed with the Czech authorities not to submit any invoices, so this is the case. And audits are ongoing. I expect the outcome of the one audit concerning Regio in December, the other Agri in January. Then we have a full picture, and we can, I can come back to this issue.
Vielen herzlichen Dank. Der nächste
Thank you very much. The next question is from Claudio Manda, S&D Coordinator in the Conte Committee.
Thank you, Chair. Commissioner Designate, it will be your task to uphold the rule of law and make sure that this is part and parcel of the new long-term budget. Can you commit yourself to ensuring that the mechanism on the rule of law will enter into force as quickly as possible? Then will you support Parliament's proposal to protect all the beneficiaries of European funds? Will you extend this scope of the fight against fraud? Do you agree with Parliament that we need to strengthen that mechanism?
Herr Kommissar.
Commissioner.
Es liegt jetzt ein Vorschlag.
There is a proposal on the table in respect of the implementation of the rule of law and the use of European monies. I think it's a sensible proposal. According to it, when the European money is involved, or when the collection of the revenue is concerned, I mean, I mentioned this a moment ago, then something can be done. If you have shortcomings in a given country, we hope that intervention will be possible in the future. What we have to make sure of, and this is part of the proposal, is that final beneficiaries don't suffer if payments are withheld to from a member state. The member state would be obliged to continue the payments in the EU's stead so that a programme that was already running could be continued and that final beneficiaries didn't lose out. That is at least the procedure that we've put forward in this proposal.
Thank you. I have a further question. Can you give us a guarantee that this mechanism on the rule of law will be applied in the same way to all the member states? In other words, will what certain member states get away with be possible for others? Or will something that's banned be banned for everybody?
Absolut.
Absolutely. In June, the Commission in office decided that a rule of law assessment would be carried out for all member states. And I think that's going to be useful. That will then give us a comprehensive picture so that we don't give the impression of unequal treatment. again, I can draw on my past experience here and say that when I was Commissioner for Regional Policy, I worked together with Olli Rehn such that a country that wasn't meeting Stability Pact criteria was threatened with the withholding of structural funds. That was something that we activated, hadn't previously been possible. And we then created a sort of formula as to how that amount would be calculated, how much would be withheld, and as I say, so that we don't give the impression of one country being treated differently to another. Honest broker does mean treating everybody equally, regardless of whether or how large or small a member state is. Thank you very much. The next question is from
Thank you, Chair. Welcome, Mr. Hahn, on my behalf as well.
Catalina Xe.
I'm really sorry.
Catalina Xe, sorry.
I'm sorry.
No, Catalina Xe. Sorry.
Thank you. I would like to focus on simplification. I spend as much time as I can reaching out to my constituents for their inputs to my work, and when funding is concerned, one of the most frequent things I hear from them is that too much bureaucracy, long processing times, limited access to information, and overly strict eligibility criteria often make it difficult for people to access cohesion funds. And this is particularly true for disadvantaged groups or for stakeholders in rural and developing areas. As I learned there has been important progress in this field, I could mention the introduction of the simplified cost option, the one-in, one-out principle, and the use of entitlement-based payments, but I believe that there is still ample space for improvement. Simple rules are understandable for the citizens and beneficiaries, can be evaluated more efficiently, and are less prone to errors. Through making EU funds more accessible, we could demonstrate in practice that Europe truly works for every single one of its citizens. So my question would be that what will be your approach to simplification, and what kind of new tools will you introduce? Thank you.
Also, Sie haben vollkommen recht. Wir haben viele Länder.
Well, you're entirely right. We've got quite a few countries. Some countries where the governments are saying we don't want any more structural funds because it's all too complex. And then there are some other areas, companies, who are saying it's just too much work for us. Well, two ways of going at this, but they're linked. One way is that we do it at our level and we propose simplification. And in the area of the structural funds, there are about 80 different measures we've taken, individual measures for the next MFF period. I hope that all of those 80 will get through the negotiation process. So that should all make it more attractive to use these funds. And then the second approach is the problem with the member states, the tendency towards gold plating, to add an extra layer of extra criteria and conditions that make everything even more complex. We need to deal with both of these problems. We need to work on both fronts, and that should make it much more attractive for the beneficiaries to call on these funds. One possibility that I mentioned is for small sums, lump sums. In those cases, not every detail of a project needs to be listed and attributed funding. Rather, we say up to 5 million euros. We'll consider it to be promotable or fundable. So all of this should actually reduce the error rate.
Thank you. And, well, in budget control, we are responsible for ensuring that EU funds are spent correctly and really reach the beneficiaries. So my follow-up question would be that what are your concrete steps to ensure that the beneficiaries experience real simplification on the ground, for instance, through the simplified cost option, but without increasing the risk of misuse or fraud? Could you give us any guarantees or any plans for that? Thank you.
Again, I just have elaborated what we have proposed. It's exactly what you are asking for. And my humble request is simply, I remember last time when I had the pleasure to negotiate the regulations for the structural funds, we had 73 political dialogue, 73 political dialogues, and believe me, none of each of them has contributed to more simplification. So my request is really stick to your own convictions, to your own aims. Try to work, let us work together that our proposals concerning more simplification really survive, are respected, and on top of this, try to prevent that our member states apply additional golden plating elements.
Vielen herzlichen Dank, Herr Kommissar. Jetzt kommt der
Thank you very much. Now, Mr. Salva.
Thank you, Chair, and first of all, my sincere apologies to my dear colleague, Madam Sheikh. During my 8 years as a member and a budgets MEP, I have probably been, having been accustomed to the budget issues working like a Swiss clock, and therefore I only looked at the official speakers list where Madame Dlabayova was before me, and because she's not present, I wasn't even listening to the chair, so my apologies. My question also was stolen, although they were supposed to be coordinated. So, and then the rule of law has been brought up 3 or 4 times. So I will ask this. I will follow up the chair of the Budgets Committee in his very important question, which I don't think he really got the answer that we all deserve, and that is that although you don't think it's possible that the final outcome of the MFF will be lower than the Commission proposal, it is very possible that the final outcome will be barely the same, if even the same. So again, I wish for a concrete answer. What can we expect from you as an honest broker in that situation when we all understand and know that the challenges and tasks that we are facing cannot be dealt with anything, certainly anything less than the Commission's proposal, which already is a meager one. Thank you.
What I can promise, what you can expect, is that I will invest in the next couple of months most of my time, almost the whole time, but I have also some other responsibilities, not only to negotiate here in Brussels between you and the Council presidency, but also to go to member states, to talk not only with the officials, but also to go to public, to seek public support for our joint aims. I cannot guarantee you a specific outcome in terms of percentage and amount, but I will do everything at least to arrive at the level of the proposal of the current Commission, because this is the minimum. And on top of this, it's not only about the money, it's about the other issues you are rightly referring. This is own resources, this is keep and even increase the level of flexibility. It's also about introduce rule of law. It's about all this, and it's about modernizing the policy, which we have to sell to our citizens. I think the main issue would be to go to our citizens to explain why we need this budget. I mean, Günther Oettinger is always referring, if you produce 100 euro, you have to pay 50 euro to the state, and 49 euros stay with the national budget, and only 1 euro is submitted to the European Union. for all the policies which are very much needed and asked from our citizens. And I think it's this what we have to do and what I will definitely do. I think this is also part, being an honest broker, to tell people about what is at stake if we are not getting a sufficient budget, because it's the European budget with this 1% where we steer the policy not only of the European Union and of Europe, but where we inject policy-driven decision in our member states. And therefore, every effort is needed to get the adequate budget. But it would be not serious if I give you a promise about a certain percentage. But I can only promise you I will do everything and I will be restless to get what is at least needed.
Follow-up question, aber bitte kurz, weil die erste Frage...
But short, please, because the first question was 1 minute 45 already.
Thank you. My follow-up is part of my original question. I will rephrase it like this. Do you promise the budgetary control of this House that you will carefully consider the needs of Olaf and the special investigational experience that they have to keep them sufficiently in this city and not send them to Luxembourg?
In order to save time, yes.
Das war eine perfekte Antwort, Herr Kommissar.
That was a perfect answer, Commissioner. And even the content was what we wanted to hear. Next, Isabel Garcia Munoz. Second person from the Cont Committee.
Señor Hahn, aquí.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I'm over here, Mr. Hahn. One of the main tasks for the new Budgets Commissioner is going to be overseeing the Commission's work to protect the financial interests of the Union. With that in mind, the S&D Group is appreciative of the commitment you set out in your replies to our written questions, to the effect that you would inform the Budget and Monetary Control Committee of the findings of OLAF investigations and the customs services. But may I further ask you how you intend to strengthen the Commission's hand in protecting the Union's financial interests in those countries who have decided not to sign up to the European Public Prosecutor's Office? Furthermore, the S&T Group is very concerned about the premature intention on the part of the Commission to extend the remit of the EPPO. It could do a lot to enhance the protection of European Union funds, but don't you agree it shouldn't have its remit extended until such time as it's proven to be competent in its existing powers? Thank you.
Honestly, I don't know if I have rightly understood your question, but if it comes to the membership structure of EPO, European Public Prosecutor, of course, we cannot be satisfied and accept that not all member states have joined EPO. I'm confident that one or the other might join soon, like Sweden, and hopefully then I think Denmark, and it hopefully triggers, it's a good example for others. We have to work that others are joining, but nevertheless, so to say, already via Olaf, we can protect our financial interests. Of course, EPO is a step forward. It's cross-border cooperation, and I think it's good to have it. It's not yet perfect, but now it's important that they start to become operative. This will be by the 1st of January 2020, and then we have to see how things evolve. And I understand that my possible future colleague Didier Reinders has already referred to it in his public hearing yesterday.
Okay, then the follow-up.
Bien, ha dicho que no se puede.
You said you can't accept the idea that there are certain countries who haven't yet joined in. Do you have any measures in mind to encourage them to sign up to the EPPO? May I reiterate my second point to you just now, which I haven't had a reply to yet, regarding the extending the powers of the European Public Prosecutor's Office. Do you agree with me that it should not be extended until it has shown that it can work efficiently in achieving its primary goal of protecting the Union's financial interests? Thank you.
Sorry, I didn't understand your second question in the first question, second part of your question. That's what I said. We have now, EPPO has now a certain mandate, and I understand there are ideas. Also, the President-designate has proposed some ideas for future tasks of EPPO. I think, and Didier Reinders yesterday, I think he was clear by saying, well, let's start with what is now the task of EPPO. Let's see how it works. And I think if things are going well, if EPPO becomes effective, and if there is in particular a need for the extension to other tasks, we should not hesitate to look into this and to modify the set of tasks concerning EPPO. Concerning the question how to, so to say, persuade, convince those who are not yet members, I cannot force them, but I mean, I will not miss any opportunity to urge them to follow. It's finally also a question of reputation for those countries which have not joined EPPO, and in the long run, it's not finally, I think, in their interest if they stay aside.
Herzlichen Dank. Jetzt kommen.
Thank you very much. Now for the Greens, Mikolaš Peksa.
Dear Commissioner, here I am. First of all, thank you very much for coming here among us to answer our questions. Mine will touch the relations between European investment banks and European Court of Auditors. The current tripartite agreement signed by the Commission, the European Investment Bank and the Court of Auditors in 2016, about to expire in 2020, lays down limitations to the audits carried out by the Court of, on banks' activities and the operations managed by the bank and guaranteed by the general budget of the European Union. Will you, as the Commissioner, make sure that existing barriers in the current tripartite agreements are removed so that European Court of Auditors will be allowed to report to the European Parliament and the European Union citizens on the full picture about the sustainability, transparency, financial and human rights, due diligence of the European Investment Bank investments and the EU financial interests managed by the European Investment Bank?
Herr Kommissar.
I understand your question, also content-wise. Look, the EIB is a European institution, but owned by our member states. So they have their own regulations, and I cannot speak on behalf of them. And it's a decision by the member states what they think is useful in terms of auditing, and if EIB should, if the Court of Auditor should audit EIB, it's not my so to say task to have at least a public opinion on this. The other thing is what I wanted to reassure you: if EIB is using EU money for certain projects, there is an opportunity for the court to audit this specific project.
Herzlichen Dank. Follow-up.
Thank you very much. Follow-up now.
Okay, thank you for this answer, at least at this form. The EIB is, as we speak, in the middle of changing its lending policies and getting ready to significantly increase its climate-related spending. And you, as the future budget commissioner, what does climate-related spending mean to you? Should investments, loans, and guarantees for gas infrastructure and mining be allowed to come from this new environmentally friendly EIB?
Herr Kommissar.
No, but for instance, I can think it's very likely that, for instance, EIB participates in the Just Transition Fund with its financial means. And this is one element. The other element could be, for instance, to renounce to provide loans, guarantees, financial products, whatever, for the construction of energy production sites which are, so to say, run by coal or lignite. This could be one of the. So I mean, there are elements how to invest and where not to invest. And I suppose this will be the discussion within EIB and with their stakeholders in the next couple of months, how to define their transition to a green bank, to the green bank of the European Union. When asked, we will certainly be able to make our contribution to this redefining of their company policy.
Vielen herzlichen Dank, Herr Kommissar.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. Next, Matteo Adinolfi.
Grazie Presidente, signor Commissario designato.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Commissioner Designate. Today, more than ever, the European Union has to make crucial political choices which are bound to have an impact on the forthcoming multi-annual financial framework. What's at stake is whether the future European Union intends to become the home of the European nations, respecting their sovereignty and identity, or whether, on the contrary, it wants to be an elite club in its own bubble, while you're debating new taxes for citizens, strengthening the rule of law, having a European finance minister, why the EEAS unnecessarily replicates functions of national diplomatic corps. How can you justify spending more, wasting money? Don't we need a genuine principle of subsidiarity to be applied? Millions of European citizens are crying out the need to crack down on irregularities in the budget. What will you say to those European citizens to persuade them of the opposite?
Ja, was soll ich antworten?
Well, what can I say? The European Parliament is made up of directly elected members of Parliament whose job, whose duty and whose right is to contribute to the establishment of the budget and the scrutiny over the budget. That is an important part of the work that's done in this House. You've also rightly referred to the subsidiarity principle, which is enshrined in the Lisbon Treaty. There's absolutely no discussion of the Commission floating away into space and hanging over Europe. It's really there. The Commission is tangible and has to decide what is done in Europe. We have to set up the budget for any next given year, and that is an opportunity to discuss what has to be done, what problems there are at regional, what problems can be solved at regional, national or European level, and to reflect that in the budget measures agreed. The European Parliament has a responsibility to be involved in that discussion and to make sure that European value added is guaranteed and to make sure that the subsidiarity principle is respected.
Herzlichen Dank, Herr Kommissar.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. A short follow-up, please, because the original question was rather long.
Grazie.
Thank you. Commissioner, you've said more than once that you respect the citizens of the member states. You and your colleagues don't seem to understand that citizens are coming under great pressure thanks to the austerity measures pushed by the Troika. It's difficult for some even to get a hot meal a day. So, Commissioner, I want to emphasize the sums that have been wasted over the years and have caused unsustainable economic damage as well as being morally unsustainable. I have in mind the cost of Parliament having 3 seats for a start, Brussels, Luxembourg and Strasbourg, as well as the exorbitant costs of pre-accession funding for Turkey, amongst many other examples. When are you going to stop wasting money in this way and get closer to the needs of ordinary citizens?
Herr Kommissar.
Also das ist ja das Wesen von Europa, dass...
Well, it's part and parcel of Europe that not everything exists here in a fishbowl in Brussels. We are present all across Europe. This is why people think they can say them in Brussels, but actually we're all part of Europe, regardless of where we are. You're members of the Parliament, I am a member of the Commission, but it applies also to the mayors of cities. They are also representative of a common Europe. And so to make that distinction would be a mistake. Through our work, wherever it is, we have to make it clear that Europe is multifaceted and not everything happens in one place. I mean, look, you spoke to me in Italian, I'm answering in German, and others have spoken other languages or are listening in other languages today. That is also something that Europe offers, something valuable. The diversity of Europe is to be found there, its resilience is to be found there, and I think that we should cultivate that and appreciate that. And accept the fact that it costs something, because at the end of the day, that money does pay its way, because it means more citizens feel ownership of Europe, because they are actually seeing the tangible parts of Europe with offices, with buildings, institutions, and what have you around Europe. And I think that's very important. We mustn't give the impression that Europe is only in Brussels. Europe really is everywhere. Last question from the Cont, Anne-Sophie Pelletier from the GUI group.
Frau Präsident, ich werde auf Französisch.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I'm going to be speaking French. The European Parliament and the European Ombudsman have called for changes to the nomination procedures for high-grade civil servants, asking for more equality of opportunity and more transparency. And the proposals made by your predecessor aren't necessarily acceptable. You, however, seem to be suggesting that no reform is necessary. How is it that the Commission can ignore a request from the only elected body in the European Union and the Ombudsman on an issue this important? Don't you think that these measures would be useful and would help to rebuild trust between the European Union and its citizens?
Herr Kommissar.
Also, ich glaube, dass
I think that the letter from my colleague and friend Günther Oettinger to the chair at the end of August was a very usable basis for nomination and recruitment policy. Based on that, we'll consider our internal consultations and deliberations. But I would go further than that. In the near future, I will be putting forward a recruitment and staff strategy, at least for the Commission, which covers more issues. There is work to be done there. It will also look at management positions and how they're filled. Now, there are lots of reasons why I think that where we can, we should have open calls for tender, but it needs to be a level playing field. There are also transfers under Article 7 of the Staff Regulation, but I think that despite the provisions of that article of the Staff Regulations, there's always room for improvement.
Ah, pardon.
My apologies.
Donc, avec votre réponse, c'est vrai que vous n'êtes pas responsable.
Well, you're right to say that you're not responsible for the previous commission, and at that time I wasn't a member of the Parliament then. But I wonder if you don't agree that nominating a political advisor to an administrative post could be considered scandalous to some citizens. The nomination of a new, when it comes to the nomination of the Secretary General of the Commission, the Ombudsman saw eye to eye with the European Parliament, where it said that the double nomination went beyond the legal framework, and also that this post was filled separately from others. Will you be doing your best in your new post to make sure that that sort of thing doesn't happen again?
Also, ich möchte jetzt nicht, ehrlich gesagt.
Well, I don't want to get into all the details here. This is something that has been discussed at length and in detail. But I will say that it was in line with existing rules and criteria there has been lengthy discussion about those rules. But staff recruitment is independent for each institution according to the Treaty on the Functioning of the European Union. But I will agree that these posts are in the public eye, particularly those in Brussels, and therefore that will have to be taken into account in the future.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm now going to take over chairing for the final two questions, which come from members of the URI Committee, and I'm grateful to the other two chairs for allowing me to, and the URI Committee, these questions. So the first of the URI questions comes from Caroline Estalter from the EPP.
Vielen Dank, Frau Vorsitzende.
Yes, thank you very much, Madam Chair. Welcome, Commissioner Designate. I'm from the Jury Committee, and my focus is on the rule of law. What I wanted to say now is that I am looking forward to a thoroughgoing debate of the rule of law concept, because that's an integral part of the MFF. I can assure you that I have my full support in doing so. One other idea for the future is digitalization. You mentioned this. You talked about the full digitalization of the European Commission. Well, you know the European Commission better than anyone else in this room, and I'm assuming that you already have some idea of how far progress has come to date. So that's my question. How do you see this? Which parts of the Commission are successfully digitalized? Are there still units that work in an analog form, which is, we can barely imagine these days? And how much financing would be required for training the Commission staff in digital technologies?
Also, ich würde sagen,
well, I don't think anybody these days works exclusively in analog form. The degree of digitalization varies, however. There's certainly room for improvement. On the whole, we've got pretty far. The problem that I would pick out is that there's a very varied landscape of IT systems. One major task for the future, and I can tell you that the current Secretary General is working on this right now, is to try and harmonize all of the different systems out there. And it's not just a question of trying to push forward digitalization within the Commission. It's a question of interoperability with the systems that our member states have and various member state institutions. That should allow us to be faster in reporting. We haven't spoken about this yet, but I know that some of you are interested in speeding up the discharge procedure. Well, there's a lot of factors that depends upon. But one factor is whether the member states are in a position to deliver the data rapidly enough. Well, that's one point where digitalization could help, that we could improve the interoperability of systems. In March or April of the year after next, you shouldn't have to be still waiting for the discharge report, but rather the autumn of the previous year. Same for training. If we pursue digitalization, then we'll have to start making better use of technologies like video conferencing. That's something that we're going to have to discuss. And we've got to talk about the need for rooms here in Brussels and in other places as well. We might have possibilities to make savings on meeting rooms if we didn't have the need for so many meetings. So we have to look at how we can use digital technologies better to do that. And maybe it'll be possible to communicate across Europe, and that could save us some money on missions. That would be a small contribution there.
About that, sorry.
There's a follow-up question, I'm sure.
Als Kommissar für Budget werden Sie auch.
Well, as Commissioner for the budget, you're also responsible for the staff of the Commission. There's still quite a lot of challenges out there, and we need efficient civil servants. They need to be well qualified, multilingual and gender balanced. So, and of course, as you stressed earlier, they need a broad geographical origin. Austrians represent 1.7% of the population of Europe, but 1.5% of the staff. Belgium, 2% of the population, but 15.2% of the staff. Germany's the other way around. 16.2% of the EU population, but 6.6% of the staff in the Commission. So what do you think of this situation? How can we improve the system? And how can we improve the diversity of the EU civil service? How can it be more representative? Can you find a more proportional distribution of the population? Well, earlier I said that in the foreseeable future we will have a HR strategy that we will put to you. that will be made up of a number of different points, but as I said earlier, there are 10 member states that are clearly underrepresented. So we need to look at how these positions can be made more attractive. Now, I was speaking to a colleague and I realized that we had, my own home country had stopped providing funding for the College of Europe in Bruges. And many high-level staff have seen the College of Europe as an entry gate to the European Commission. We have to look at how we can make service in the European Commission much more popular and attractive. As I said, there are 10 member states that are seriously underrepresented in the civil service. And we have to make efforts, look at how we can hold special competitions at national level to try and make up for this deficit.
Thank you very much. The final question comes from Jackie Jones from the S&D Group.
Oh, yeah. Best for last, I assume. I want to thank you for coming here. Vielen Dank, Herr Hahn. I also want to thank you for expanding on your written answer on gender equality, which really needed some fleshing out, and also about the rule of law. I note that you promise, your principle is to promise less, but to deliver more. I think what I would love to see is that you promise more and you deliver even more when it comes to gender equality in all aspects of your portfolio. Now, we've had several questions already on gender equality, notably by the previous speaker and Madame Pellier, Rubial and Vana, who have answered, well, they've stolen my questions, really. But let me just put it to you this way. You mentioned in your own home country that you were looked favorably on legally binding quotas and budgetary planning tools. What else can you tell us that you're going to implement within this informal working group with the European Parliament and, of course, social partners?
Yeah, I was referring to a specific initiative I had to take around 12 years ago, when we discovered that I was in charge of the universities, when I discovered that committees dealing with the assignment of chairs, if there were no women in this committee, this had an impact on the terms of reference for potential chairs, for potential professors. And that's why it was necessary to introduce a quota in order to guarantee that women are members of such committees, because this had immediately an impact on the terms of reference. And I discovered this could be something we have to introduce also here in Brussels, if it was not yet, or it is not yet the case, as an example. And I think this is a very concrete example where we can further improve, so to say, gender equality. Another issue is, for instance, there's an initiative, I think, from some of my colleagues from February this year called No Woman, No Panel Initiative. Also, this is, I think, something important to take care, all of us, you, I, if you are invited to a panel, to care if there is adequate representation of women and men. By the way, it could be also the other way around. No? We are talking about equality, but I think these are some very concrete measures. If I look simply at the figures concerning the staff in the Commission, I think we have made significant progress over the last 5 years. I think a very impressive figure is, if you take middle management, which is the first level, we have now, I think, 44% of women, 20 years, and this is an increase of 20% since 1995. And I'm very confident because nowadays we have much more women starting in the Commission services than men, so this will automatically lead to more management, more women in the management, but for the time being we have to push on this. But in general, our aim was 40%, and I think we are now almost at 41%.
Thank you, Jackie.
Thank you for some of those concrete answers, and quotas are certainly one way forward. And within this informal working group, for example, would you commit to, let me help you, to improve the working conditions of European civil servants, to contractual agents and other agents, as well as making sure that in your HR strategy you consult with the social partners and integrate them? And would you commit to, in the first 100 days, to implement all of these proposals and hopefully more? In the interest of time, you can just say yes if you like.
A huge temptation. I don't know if I can make it in 100 days because we discussed today exhaustively about MFF and budget and all these issues. Again, I want to be serious, but I from my own experience now in DG NEAR, we have a lot of excellent contractual agents, and this expires after 7 years, beside the fact of their, so to say, regulatory and salary-related position inside the Commission. It's very often a pity if you lose an experienced person because she or he has to leave the Commission after 7 years. So it's an issue where I have my own experience and I try to change it. I can't tell you now how to do this and what are potential financial and other implications, but I'm aware about this, and it is an issue which has to be addressed.
Let me, at this point in time, thank the members for the questions and the Commissioner-designate for his answers. And I want to pass him the word now for his, let's say, concluding or closing statement. But please, Mr. Commissioner-designate, keep the 5 minutes strictly in your view.
I understand, Mr. Chair. I want to be short. And if I was sometimes a little bit too long, not only I wanted to prove about my knowledge, but also my enthusiasm, my dedication, and sometimes, indeed, I was very, so to say, enthusiastic about what I hopefully can do in the future and what should and has to be done. I thank you for this very, from my point of view, I didn't consider it as a hearing. It was a fruitful exchange of views, and to see where we are, what has to be done, in particular in the next couple of months. I can only reassure you that what I have, how I have worked in the last 10 years, and sorry for being already here 10 years, I will continue in the future, committed to be in touch with members of the Parliament, and some of you know me already almost for 10 years, because some are here for more than 10 years. There is a policy of open doors. You can call me. Many of you have my mobile number. There shouldn't be a reason why not others should get it. So there is, so to say, open policy, big reassurance to work on our common goals. I understand of today's discussions we share in most of the cases a very common view, and I can reassure you I'm very much dedicated to the European Union. I don't like to speak about the European project because we are too much advanced, and therefore I don't like the notion project. It's a fantastic institution, a fantastic supranational institution, and I like to work here. I like to work together with you in the interest, and I think this is the most important thing, of our citizens. We should never forget we are working for our citizens, and this is something we should never forget, we should keep in mind. And in that respect, I hope I could convince you, and I get your confirmation, and then I expect a very fruitful 5 years cooperation in the interest of Europe and its citizens. Thank you very much.
This ends our meeting. Thank you all, but the coordinators have, of course, still a job to do, as they know.